Quite often we have people inquire about software and they find some off the shelf, out of the box software that they've been using, but it doesn't quite fit their needs. They pay a subscription, whether that's a monthly or a yearly subscription, that might be $100 a month. And then they find, because it doesn't quite do what they want, maybe they can get their own version built custom and have it exactly how they want it. They're only spending $100 a month, so maybe if they spend $10,000, they'll get the exact thing that they want. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work that way, and software is quite expensive to build. The process that we use, first of all, you've got the requirements gathering. You've got to talk with the client, understand what needs to be built and what do the screens look like. Is it a web application? Is it a mobile application? Do the screens need to work across different device sizes? So make sure the screens look good on a mobile device, make sure that they look good on a PC, on a tablet, and so the screens have to adjust in display. Once we have all the requirements down, that will usually be a pretty high level. We can then go down and do a bit of a design, and then a quoting workshop type arrangement, and give them a figure on how much we expect it would cost, the time frame it'll take. This will all factor in development time, testing time, fixing any alterations to specs, deployment time, documentation, and all this obviously takes a considerable length of time. And I think the key point there is time. What someone is paying for when software is developed is time, and how many people are involved. So if it's a 6-month project and there's 3 people working on that full time, you basically have 18 months worth of resources that have to be paid for, plus there's the profit margin on top of that, plus there's the expenses that we incur, licensing for software tools, development tools, any third-party subscription applications, all those things, toolkits. That all gets factored into the final cost. Then there might be some investigation or prototyping processes that happen. Usually that would happen in cases where a client comes and says, we're going to be first to market, where we want to build this piece of software that no one else has ever built before. So it's a unique piece of software. The problem's never been solved by someone else before. So when we're tasked with developing software for that, we have to go out there and do the research, test out how we'll successfully build it. There might be a few iterations there. So again, that adds to the extra cost. One of the other big things that a lot of people don't see, and they'll probably never see, which adds considerable cost, is the error handling. Error handling, there's so many different edge cases that need to be handled when you build software. So a user might input some data into a form. If they do it correctly, the software works fantastic and it's really quick to develop, and it'll give you the results that you're looking for. As soon as someone goes off the beaten track and tries to do something silly, whether that's on purpose or inadvertently, that's when the problems occur. When the problems occur, the person who's purchased the software still wants the software to run and be robust. They don't want it to crash. They don't want their system to go down. They don't want some bad data going into their database. They want everything still to operate and function as it should. So we need to cater for all the different use cases and all the different ways that a user could interact with the software. If some data failed to go to a database, that could have been some network outage, the internet was down. We don't want them just to try once, so we should accept the user's input. If we try and it fails, we may need to implement a retry mechanism. So then that retries 3, 4, 5 times. If after the 5th time it's really going to fail, it's never going to succeed, then we might need to alert someone and send emails. So all of this handling adds complexity to the build. And then you've got other things like if you're interacting with third-party services, whether that might be a different API. So we might be sending something to Xero, or we might be sending something to MyOb. That API that we're using may be limited by how many requests per hour or how many requests per minute, and we have to abide by those terms and conditions of the third-party API. So even if the software we build can take thousands and thousands of requests a minute, we can't just bomb that over to the third party. So we then have to factor in an additional layer of complexity there to throttle communications, and again do the error handling as well. Other things that introduce complexity in time and cost is when there's what we call scope creep. The client comes with a set of requirements, and then halfway through they decide, they want to make a change. It's not exactly how they envisage it, or they had some meetings with their business and decided to take a different path. We may have already started development down one path. We then have to unpick and change the way it was written. So we've spent time building one thing, got halfway through it, have to undo that, make all the necessary changes, rebuild the new thing. So we've done twice the amount of work. And that usually comes about when we continually give the user demos of what we've built at incremental stages through the development process. So that's following the agile sort of Scrum methodology. So as we build each iteration, each little feature, once it's in an operational state, it's not the full piece of software that's being shown, but small little features. The user gets to interact and see how it works, what it looks like. And then once it's there and they can see and touch and feel it, then they can go, oh, actually, I don't really like that initial idea. I want to change it. So there's pros and cons. Obviously, we go there and say, well, you wanted this, you want to change it. That's going to be extra. But at least we don't get to the end of the software process. Here's the full version. This is the first time you've seen it, and they don't like it. When we go and speak with clients about all of these things and we give them quotes and estimates, quite often the reaction is, well, that's very expensive and we can't afford that. And then they look overseas and they get a quote from an outsourcing company overseas, whether that could be Philippines, could be India, Vietnam. There's quite a few countries that are quite common, and it will come back a fraction of the cost. And quite often we find from our experience that these companies are giving small figured quotes to win the work. They may be naive and not really understand the complexity of the software. They may be doing a really shortcut, simplified development cycle, and giving a really substandard piece of software at the end. Or, as I said, they may be just trying to win the work, and then what they'll say is, oh, this is actually taking longer than we thought, or this is going to be harder than we thought. So, yes, we said it was going to be $30,000, but now we need an extra 10, and we need another 10 and another 10, and just keep adding to the cost of the software. The other thing that happens is they don't change the cost, but it's more complex than they thought. And the project just drags for years and years and years. We've had some inquiries where someone's gone overseas for a cheap piece of software and they were told it would be done in 6 months, and 2 to 3 years later it's still unfinished and the company doesn't exist anymore. In these cases, unfortunately, the client has sort of been swindled into paying a small fee for some software. They've been given unrealistic expectations. They've gone ahead with it. The money's disappeared. They don't have the quality software that they're after, and they then have to come back to a more reputable software developer and have it fixed. So not only do you have to then pay for getting what was already developed fixed, but you then have to pay for the next lot of features and to finish off the software. Sometimes it's actually more economical to restart from scratch, so all that time and money and everything is gone to waste. Sometimes you can sort of salvage what's there. And quite often, a lot of the outsourcing companies overseas are using old technologies, old languages, old versions of things like Angular or React, old .NET versions. So they're getting old, out of date software developed. Then they bring it over to Australia. To then maintain it is more expensive because most of the developers are using the newer technologies. There's not as many people that are using the older technology, so finding a developer to maintain it is harder. Whether that's an outsourced local developer or whether that's just trying to hire someone internally. So that's another issue. Other things is if you go outsourcing, you're not so much protected by the Australian consumer law. So when things do go pear-shaped, you don't really have much recourse there. And one other thing that we've noticed is some of these outsourced companies overseas are actually putting up Australian fronts. So they'll have a website or a company in Australia and it'll act and look like an Australian company, and they'll quote it quite cheaply, but all the work will be done overseas. So in effect, you are still getting the work done overseas by international developers. I guess the advantage there is that you may have some more protection with Australian consumer law. Unfortunately, when people do come back to us and they'll say, well, we've been overseas and we've had a bad experience, we don't have the source code, or the developers actually have it on their servers. They've been given the final compiled version, which is deployed, but they don't actually have the source code to work on. We have our own difficulties then, so we have to either try and unpick from what's on the websites that have been deployed and try and reconstruct things. Again, that's extra cost to rebuild that. There might be limited documentation on how things are deployed, how things have been built. So then we have, again, additional costs to then reverse engineer all the documentation for everyone. There may not be backup scenarios in place. There may not be disaster recovery. All the accounts might be set up by developers, and so the actual client doesn't have access to any of these accounts. So what we do when we build software is all the accounts that are required, the client will actually subscribe or create them and then grant us access. That means that they're in full control, and this the same goes for the source code, that they'll always have access to their source code. They'll also be able to meet the developers. The developers will be able to have one-on-one conversations through Microsoft Teams or Zoom, Google Meet. They'll have email contact as well, so they can talk one-to-one with the developers and any of the project managers as well. We also run, because we're doing the Agile and Scrum methodology, we have Kanban boards. These also would be in the possession of the client, so that they'll, even if they were to go somewhere else, they've got the full history of all the tasks that were created, any communications on those tasks that can hand over to a developer. And that's, again, another reason why we get them to create all these accounts. So if they do decide to leave for whatever reason, they may even just want to hire their own internal developers. There is limited handover process. They don't have to get passwords from us. They don't have to worry about getting usernames. It's all there for them. In terms of quoting a software project, one thing, an easy way to sort of get a ballpark figure is to think, what is the average salary for one developer, even if you were just to hire them as an internal developer. If we said that that was anywhere between $90,000 and $120,000, then you can look at that and say, well, if my project was going to take 12 months to build for one person, that's the cost. Then if you're outsourcing to an agency such as Cubisoft, obviously you've got to work in a profit margin on top of that. So you could be easily looking at $150,000 to $200,000 for a 12-month project for one developer to work on it full time. When we do build the software, the technologies we'll choose are going to be considered for the type of software that we're building. Sometimes it might be PHP, sometimes it might be a .NET. It all depends on the actual software and what we think is best. The same thing with hosting, whether that would be better on an AWS platform, whether it might be better on an Azure platform, or self-hosted somewhere on the client's own servers. When we do a front end, so the user interface, are we going to do it as a single page app, something similar to like React or an Angular, or are we going to do it as regular JavaScript and HTML and maybe use jQuery? All of these things factor into the cost, but also for ongoing maintenance, which is very important. And the technologies that we choose, one of the big driving factors is, can we get developers readily to support that technology? So not just for our own benefit, but for the client's benefit, in that if they need it, even if they wanted to hire their own staff, can they put an ad on Seek or Indeed and reliably get someone to do it? And for us, obviously, if we need to ramp up, or if we had a staff turnover, how easy is it for us to get a replacement to get up and running pretty quickly and continue the development of that software? And so in summary, yes, custom software is going to be an expensive process and an expensive journey to go on, but getting it completed by Cubisoft locally, you'll get a personalized experience one-on-one with the developers, the project managers. We can meet in person. We have office in Adelaide, offices in Melbourne. We can travel out to your offices and meet you on site. We can provide on-site support. It will feel like the development team is part of your own organization, and the relationships are intended to be long-term, and the software that you do get built should be considered and treated like an asset of your business. So it's not something that is thrown away. It's going to enhance your business. It's going to streamline. So it may cost, let's say it costs you $200,000. You should be looking to get more than $200,000 worth of benefit, whether that's through reduced salary or diverting workers to do things that in your business that weren't being attended to. Once a piece of software has been developed, whether that's by us or by another developer, and it's actually live within a business, it's not a set and forget type scenario. The software has to be maintained and supported for the life of that software while it's in the business and while it's being used. So support activities might be upgrading libraries to newer versions, fixing bugs, adding small features or larger features that are missing at the time of deployment. There might be some access issues, so users maybe forgot their password and can't get in anymore. There might have been a security breach. Might need data backups, all sorts of different things that need to occur. And I think a lot of businesses seem to forget that this is the case, that once software has been developed, it is an ongoing investment, and they need to consider these different things. So that's one service that we do offer, is that we do offer a monthly software maintenance service and support service. This is usually a fixed cost per month, which gives a number of hours allocated to that client, where we'll have developers available to work on any issues that are raised. It might be even that they want some documentation created. The minimum we do is 10 hours per month at a fixed rate. When we were discussing this at our last planning day, one developer actually brought up a really good term which we could use as a product offering, and that was software insurance. The reason why we came up with this term, or this developer came up with this term, was basically we have some clients who actually pay the ongoing fee, but they don't actually, for the whole month, don't actually engage our services. All it literally is them putting aside a small amount of money each month to us in case something happens, so that they're not alone, that if something does blow up, or if they do need help, or they have to ask a question, there is someone to call on. It's sort of like a phone a friend option. And this is particularly important when they don't have their any in-house developers, or they may have some in-house developers, but the actual team is quite small. So it's a common scenario where a business might have one or two, maybe junior developers or intermediate developers, in which case that keeps their wage costs down, but they can do most of the technical tasks in-house. But when they need some more expert help or some advanced support, then they don't have to have an in-house senior developer. They can call on us to support in that way. So from that point of view, we're also looking to provide that on-demand project manager, on-demand CTO, Chief Technical Officer, on-demand team lead, those sort of roles where if you were to hire someone, a dedicated person, full-time in-house, then you could be looking at upwards of $150,000 to $200,000 in salaries, whereas someone might not need a full dedicated person for that within their business, but they still need some reliable advice from that kind of person, and that's where I think we can step in and do that. Supporting other people's software, it seems like it's actually a niche market, and not a lot of people or a lot of other software businesses actually do. It seems like when we get inquiries to support existing software, that we find out that they've tried contacting other software developers and they don't do it, or that the only support that other companies will provide is support for software that they themselves have developed. And so in those cases, the customer would come and say, we've got XYZ piece of software, can you help maintain it or add a few features? And the answer will be no, we didn't build it, so we can't support it. But on the other hand, we could rebuild it, a new version, and then support it after that. So they get the double dip of writing a new piece of software and getting the support. So I think there's that missing offering where developers are available to support existing software that someone has invested in. It could be a good piece of software, but sometimes, it just seems that other developers don't want to sort of touch stuff that they didn't develop. I think there's a real skill in being able to pick up someone else's code with not a lot of supporting documentation or a lot of experience with that piece of software and be able to work with it in quick time, basically. Being able to unravel how things are put together, understand all the nuances, being able to deploy new versions, fix bugs, set up a development environment so all the developers can actually make effective changes. So, and I think that might be the underlying reason why a lot of people don't like to offer that service, is there's no fixed procedure. It's very much a ad hoc problem solving exercise. It can't be streamlined. You can't write a manual for it and say you've got to do this, 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 and this, because it is a piece of custom software. There's no guarantee that they've followed the same guidelines as another piece of software, and it can be a tricky exercise to undertake. We've actually got a good team who has been able to do that time and time again. So we've taken on a lot of new projects where we haven't developed the software. We've been provided no documentation. Some accounts we just don't have or didn't have. We weren't familiar with the servers that the software was deployed on. But just we were able to sort of inch our way through, discover a lot of the problems, make improvements, document things, so that we do the housekeeping and leave it in a better state than what was provided to us. And I think the benefit to us in doing that as well is we build the relationship with the customer. It shows that we do care about their software. We do care about their business. We can help them out of a pickle, because that's ultimately what they want. They've got a problem. They just need someone to help them solve it. And then moving forward, we usually are then entrusted with more feature development and potentially bigger projects. And I think that's a bit of lead generation there, in that we're not always we don't start with the big projects that we want, the 6 or 7 figure sum projects up front, and then we'll do the support. But if we start with the support, which are the small numbers, and hopefully that grows into the bigger numbers down the track. One customer that we do currently have, he's a good example of this software insurance support idea. He very rarely makes contact, but when he does, he'll reach out via an email or a phone call and arrange a time slot just to sit with him for an hour or two. It could be on a Teams call. He'll screen share. This is the problem he's encountering. This is what he's tried to do. This is what he'd like to do. What do we recommend he try, or how does he fix that issue? And so we'll sit there together for an hour or two, provide some documentation, some links, maybe even fix the issue right there on the spot with him. And he goes away happy. His problem is solved. And we also have some other clients that do prefer the face-to-face. So one of them in Melbourne. So I've flown over there before to go on site, but other times we just get the boys in Melbourne to do it, and they go on site and work on the server right there. They just like to have, we don't have remote access to that server. They just like to have someone there, and they can talk to them in person and discuss the issues. That particular server is Windows server. Other servers that we work on are Linux servers. So it doesn't really matter the platform that we work on. It doesn't matter the technology. So we still try and concentrate on PHP and .NET and Python as the back-end type languages, front end Angular and React and HTML, CSS, all those types of technologies. We have looked at supporting other things like VB, and while it is possible, when we start departing too broad from our core skills, then it becomes a little bit difficult, because you have to have a lot of different development environments set up on every developer's PC or laptop, and then it just becomes a logistical issue. So while we do support lots of different software, we do try and constrain it to some degree, just to prevent that context switch issue where developers are thinking about they're working in one paradigm, and then all of a sudden they have to separate into something completely different, and it's just a time sink where you lose time readjusting how you think about a problem, because the technologies are just so different. So we try and constrain it that way. And for that reason, we don't really do a lot of desktop application support either, but focus it more on that mobile web application type arrangement. We also have our customers who use this support to just get general technical advice. They might do their own research on Google, but just having someone that they can trust to talk about technical issues and get an unbiased opinion is valued in their business. Things might be, if they're looking at bringing a different piece of software that they purchased to purchase, like from a monthly subscription into their business, how would that work? How would it integrate with what systems they already use? Those sorts of things. Could be, if we get an in-house developer, what skills should we be putting in the ads? What technologies do we need to advertise for? And even to run the interviews and sit in with the interviews to make an effective hire. Because a lot of these people that do own businesses aren't technical minded. Like, they might be in the aged care industry, for example, and they're experts in that area, but they need technology to help run their business, but they're not technology minded. So they just need someone they can trust and help them along the way in those areas as they need it, but not full time.